Hey, Chris.
There you go, folks, look up there. You can see that spiked portcullis or drop gate. You may notice I am not standing underneath it. I know what holds it up. Not a lot, come on. Don't trust it. Yep. Yep. Go on then, folks, liven up. Go right round. That's it.
Thanks.
Go on, you lot. Close in a little bit, close in a little bit. We've got any Americans here today? Any Americans here? Hello there, folks. Are you enjoying your holidays, yeah?
Yes, very much.
Could have all been yours, couldn't it? You paid your blooming taxes. Any Australians here?
Yeah.
Welcome home. Welcome home.
What about New Zealanders?
New Zealanders, our Hobbit film. I'll let everybody else think about that one for a moment. We've got any Europeans here? Any Europeans here? Where are you from, madam? Hungary, fantastic. No, I have a bit. Any others? Any other Europeans here? Where are you from, madam? Austria, oh, wonderful. We've got any English here today? Not at work? Not European, no?
Oh yeah, we're Irish.
Ah, oh, you're Irish. I know a tale or two about this place with Irish people. I'll save it for later. Right, we're now standing in the outer wall. As I say, we are standing in the area between the inner and outer ballium or defensive wall. The inner wall is over 50 feet high. The outer one is some 25 feet thick. To your left is Mint Street, so named for it is here until the year 1810. The coins of the realm were both designed and produced. The buildings that house the mint are known as the casemates or houses within the walls, and are now home to some of my Yeoman Water colleagues and their families. Behind you, ladies and gentlemen, is a tall, narrow archway. Next to the one which you just walked through. This is called a sally port and was once a wall entrance. Well, beyond there is a small drawbridge leading down to the Queen's Stairs and directly down to the River Thames. Now, rather than travel through the narrow and the crowded streets of London, royalty and nobility would make their way down the River Thames in impressive barges, moored up alongside those steps to gain easy access to the Tower of London. The gates that you see around there are original, are some 650 years old. Well, it was here, on this very spot, that King Henry VIII so lovingly greeted a young lady who has become his second wife. Her name was Anne Boleyn. She was the mother of Queen Elizabeth I. It was a marvellous day when Anne walked through those gates in preparation for her very own coronation. Henry was standing just there, sir, just there. He turned round and got down on one knee. I don't expect you to do that. He took Anne by the hand and looked lovingly into her dark, dark, raven-coloured eyes and said, Anne, Anne, my darling, I, King Henry VIII of all England, will love, cherish you for the rest of your life. But poor Anne was fated to return some 3 years later for very different reasons and for a very different gate. But I shall tell you more about her demise later on. Now, to your front is the bell tower, so named because of the small white box on top, which holds the oldest curfew bell in the city of London. But when that bell is alarmed, the gates are closed and locked, the portcullis is lowered, and the battlements are manned. It was also sounded to let the population know that an execution was about to take place. Now, the bell tower is the strongest of all 13 towers on the inner ward. It stands on a solid base of masonry, some 30 feet thick, 20 feet below ground and 10 feet above. It contains 2 circular prison chambers, one above the other. Now, these are unique in that they are not interconnected with a staircase. Access can only be gained through the lower and the upper floor of the Queen's house, which is now the home of the resident governor and his family. Now, due to its form of construction, some very important prisoners have been held within these walls. The man for all seasons, Sir Thomas More, one time Lord Chancellor of all England and good friend to King Henry VIII. He was held in the lower chamber. At the same time, for the very same reason, John Fisher, the Bishop of Rochester, would be held in the upper chamber. Now, both men failed to recognise King Henry VIII as the supreme head of the Church of England and would have suffered terribly. Sir Thomas More was kept in that lower chamber for 15 months of his life, in the cold and the dark and the damp, until the authorities realised, well, they realised that they could never break his spirit. So we took him up to Tower Hill, and there we broke his body with an axe. It wasn't until some 400 years later, in 1935, that both of these men were canonised as saints of the Roman Catholic faith. James Scott, the Duke of Monmouth. Has anybody ever heard of him? No, I thought not. But when I finish telling you about him, you'll never forget his name. It is said that he was the eldest of 13 illegitimate children by King Charles II. Now, on the death of his father in 1685, this young and popular man was persuaded to stake his claim to the throne by virtue of his uncle James II, being a known Roman Catholic. To press home his claim, he landed in the west country of England, moving inland, gaining popular Protestant support en route in what was to be known as the Monmouth Rebellion. The revolt, however, was crushed at the Battle of Sedgemoor on the 6th of July, 1685. And although the leader escaped the battlefield that day, evaded capture, it eventually be found hiding, in fact cowering, in a ditch a week later. During his absence, he was sentenced to death. There was no need for a trial. So 3 days later, we took him from here to Tower Hill to be publicly executed by means of block and axe. Well, it was to prove the bloodiest execution in the whole of English history. The executioner that day was a giant of a man, known only as Jack Ketch. Now, he would use 5 strokes of the axe to sever that head. But even then, he had to cut through the remaining bone, gristle, sinew, and flesh! With his very own butcher's carving knife. Now, both head and body were eventually brought back to the Tower of London for burial here in the Chapel Royal St. Peter ad Vincula some 24 hours later. But strangely, it is said that both the head and the body were stitched back together again. I shall tell you why later on. But enough of this blood and gore. Let us go down to Traitor's Gate. I'll tell you some more. Come on, let's go. Famous Traitor's Gate. It was built on the order of King Edward I because he required a safer and more useful entranceway into the Tower of London. Now, London in those days was an extremely dangerous place to be, where convoys could be attacked, stores stolen, and prisoners set free. So he decided to use the River Thames as a natural highway. He ordered that a hole be knocked into the outer defensive wall, so that at high tide boats could pass through and load their cargoes in safety. Therefore, this was originally known as the Watergate. I'll move on. Now, having breached the hole in the outer defensive wall, he soon realised it weakened his defences and ordered that a tower be built over the top of the archway. He had this tower named in honour of a former constable of ours, St Thomas à Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who was murdered at Canterbury Cathedral in 1170 on the orders of his great-grandfather Henry. Now, the archway that you see before you is a marvel of medieval architecture, spanning some 61 feet and having no supporting keystone to hold it up. As I have already mentioned, this was known as the Watergate. So how did it become known as Traitor's Gate? Well, it was during the Tudor period that it became an ideal spot to bring prisoners into the Tower of London, those mostly accused as traitors to the monarch. Through those gates have come no less than 3 queens of England: Queen Anne Boleyn, Queen Catherine Howard, and Lady Jane Grey, the uncrowned queen of only 9 days. High dignitaries of the Church, of course, no exception. Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and the Bishops Ridley and Latimer were all brought in through those very gates during the reign of Queen Mary Tudor, Bloody Mary. Now, these 3 pious men were later taken to Oxford, where they was burned at the stake for heresy. Those and many more poor unfortunate souls would have made their way down the River Thames by boat or barge from their trials at London's Guildhall or the Palace of Westminster. They would have passed through those very gates. They would have landed at the steps, only to be met by an escort of good-looking yeoman warders. They would then have been led under the archway of the bloody tower to their place of imprisonment to await whatever fate had in store for them. All too often, it resulted in them being handed over to the sheriffs of London for a short journey to their place of execution. Behind you there, ladies and gentlemen, is the infamous Bloody Tower, originally known as the Garden Tower, on account that it overlooked the Lieutenant's Garden, but its name was changed to the Tower of Blood, or the Bloody Tower, during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, to commemorate the many tragedies that have been enacted within. Surely the most terrible tragedy of them all was the alleged murder of the 2 boy princes in 1483. Edward V and his younger brother Richard, Duke of York, were brought to the Tower by their uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, to prepare for the oldest boy's coronation. But sightings of these 2 young lads playing in and around the grounds became less and less until they were seen no more. It is alleged that they were murdered by being suffocated with a pillow or perhaps even stabbed to death in the upper chamber. Their small bodies were taken out by an unknown priest the following day, buried in a secret plot underneath a staircase to the south side of the White Tower. There, their remains lay for 191 years, until the reign of King Charles II, when workmen working in an area over there, they came upon a small wooden chest. Excitedly, they ripped it open, hoping to find lost treasure. But all that was in there were the bones of those two small boys. Now, it's agreed by experts of the day that they're indeed the bodies of the two young princes, and so they placed them in an urn, designed by Sir Christopher Wren. They took them to Innocents' Corner in Westminster Abbey, where they lay to this day. Now, as we make our way under the archway of the Bloody Tower, folks, I can point out to you the second portcullis or drop gate. This one was built over 700 years ago. It weighs 2.5 tons and is still in working order. Ladies and gentlemen, a word of warning. As we pass under that portcullis, please be careful. The rope that holds it up is original. You lot go first. You're going that way, folks, up to them steps through there. Go on! Let's go. To your front is William the Conqueror's Norman Keep, known as the Great White Tower. Now, building work started in the year of 1078. And as you can see, folks, we're still building it. Now, it took over 20 years to complete under the direction of Gondopher Beck, the Bishop of Rochester. They had the tower built over 90 feet high, and the walls vary in thickness from 15 feet at the base to 11 feet at the top. On each of the corners, you'll notice there's a turret, 3 of them are square, and 1 round the back is round. But it's in the round one that the first Royal Observatory was established. Now, on top of the turret, you'll notice a gold crown, underneath which is a weather vane showing a royal standard. Well, this lets us know that this is still a royal palace, although no longer a royal residence. But never lose sight of the fact, ladies and gentlemen, the kings and queens live within these walls here for well over 500 years. Now, the royal family, well, they live mainly on the top floor. Now, you can't see the top floor from here, folks, today, because we're doing some conservation work there. But if you look up there, you'll see a lovely picture of it, all right? Now, the middle floor was a banqueting hall. It was a council chamber, accommodation for knights and their ladies. It is also the site of the chapel of St. John the Evangelist, one of the oldest Norman Romanesque old churches in England. The lower floor was mainly for servants and retainers. Yet, we had another floor. We had it below ground level. Here, stores and provisions were kept for part of this rather far more sinister past. But as in there, where the rack and other implements of torture were used on poor unfortunate souls. It was a dark, damp, evil-smelling place. It was lit only by the flicker of candles. I like doing that. I don't know why. No sound of the cries of pain or anguish we heard throughout those thick walls. Today, very little of its sinister past remains. We've turned it into a gift shop. Now, my story at this point would not be complete if I did not mention the ravens of the Tower of London. Now, these large black birds are popular and familiar sights to visitors, but no one really knows how they came about being here. But there was a legend, and the legend tells us that should the ravens leave the Tower of London, it would crumble into dust and the monarchy shall fall. Well, everybody knows this is medieval superstition and nonsense. But in the year 1660, King Charles II was asked permission from the Observer Royal to have the ravens removed. In those days, there was a large telescope on top of the White Tower, and the ravens kept on fouling its lens. Now, the king didn't care whether they was here or not until he heard about the legend. But you must remember, it was his father, King Charles I, who was executed on the orders of Oliver Cromwell. Now, rather than risk the anger of destiny, he ordered that 6 ravens be held at the Tower of London forevermore. Today, thankfully, we still have 6 ravens here. Of course, we're not superstitious. We've got 1 extra. They're looked after by myself. I'm known as the Raven Master, and some say, Raven Man. So let's make our way out to the execution sites, folks. Up here, come on, chop, chop. You know, it's a go with size, doesn't it? Yes. Hear no, see no, speak no evil. Come on, close. Dodgy characters. A group of yeoman warders are known as a moan. Absolutely over there. Right, we're now standing on Tower Green, the village green to the Tower of London, but unlike most village greens, this one is rather special, for here we have our very own execution site. See, they're queuing up for it now. Now, that small paved area is not to be confused with the public scaffold site on Tower Hill here. Only 6 people were executed. 3 of them were Queens of England. But before I tell you about them, let me describe the buildings that surround us. Now, down there to your left, beyond those trees, you'll find the entranceway to the Bloody Tower, where many famous names were incarcerated behind those very walls. Some of them never to leave alive. Moving further to your right, see that large black and white house there? That is the Queen's house, a perfectly preserved Tudor residence. That is still the home of the resident governor and his family. Now, over the passage of time, some very important prisoners have been held within those walls. Queen Catherine Howard, wife of King Henry VIII, She was held there before her execution on Tower Green. Now, another character being held up there on the top floor was William Penn for his offensive writings. Even though whilst in prison, he still managed to write that controversial pamphlet, No Cross, No Crown. No, he was only released on condition he left the country until he crossed to the other side of the Atlantic and became the founder of the famous Quaker colony in Pennsylvania, named in honour of his father. Is anybody from Pennsylvania here this afternoon? Yes, folks, he was a criminal. Now, the very last prisoner to be held here inside the walls of the Tower of London was Rudolf Hess. He was then moved to the countryside for his own safety for the remainder of the war. Famously, he was tried in the Nuremberg trials and sentenced to life imprisonment in Spandau prison. Now those... Now those houses that you see either side of the Queen's House, those are the light blue doors, are now home to some of my young colleagues and their families. To your front, ladies and gentlemen, is the Beauchamp Tower. Now in there, in the basement down there, is a display all about the prisoners. But be sure to use the interior staircase to go and visit the State Prison Room on the first floor. In there, many notable inscriptions have been carved into the stonework. Some of them are over 450 years old. Moving further to right to that large house there, that is our resident doctor's house. At night times, the Tower of London is locked up and secured, and we live within the walls here at the Tower of London with our families. So if he can't help us out, next door to him is the resident chaplain's house. Now this is the beautiful Chapel Royal St. Peter ad Vincula, Latin for St. Peter in Chains. Now ladies and gentlemen, after this tour, you can make your way inside our beautiful Chapel Royal. But a couple of points I'd like to mention before you go inside today. First of all, there has been no eating, no drinking, no smoking inside the chapel. And sadly, there has been no photography, video recording or sound recording also taking place inside our chapel. Now as you go in through the entranceway, there is a small step. It's about this high. It is there on the way in. And it is there on the way out too. Be careful of it, OK? Now, if moving further along, you see this building here is the Waterloo Block. It stands on the side of what was once a grand storehouse, but that was burnt down by fire in 1841. And as a result of that, this building was erected in 1845 and was a home to up to 1,000 soldiers stationed here at the garrison. Nowadays, it holds the exquisite crown jewels. An entrance can be gained again after this tour, ladies and gentlemen. Underneath that clock, you'll find a set of doors. Ladies, when you go in there, look at those diamonds. Oh, they're massive. Then look down at the ring on your finger. Look lovingly into your husband's eyes and slap him. Well, you brought me there. Look at that. Now, the far end of the square over there is the Museum of the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers, an old infantry regiment formed up here inside the walls of the Tower of London in 1685. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let us return our attentions back now to our very own private execution site. Now, the first person to lose their head there in the year 1536 was Queen Anne Boleyn, second wife to King Henry VIII, brought to the Tower of London under sentence of death through Traitor's Gate, charged with incest, adultery, witchcraft. But she was not beheaded with an axe. She feared that weapon greatly, but in a French fashion, with a sharp, long, double-edged sword. Now, as the executioner removed her head, as was tradition, and held it high into the air, there was a gasp of horror from the assembled crowd before her. That was better than last time, wasn't it? When they noticed that her lips were still moving and talking in prayer, and her eyes continued to gaze around and look at the assembled audience before her. I like that story. In 1541, it would be the turn of Margaret Pole, the Countess of Salisbury. Now, this dear old lady had committed no crime. Neither was she afforded the luxury of a trial. She was unfortunately the mother of Cardinal Reginald Pole, and it was a cardinal that King Henry VIII would have loved to have got his hands upon. But he was in Rome preaching against the king. That the king could not get to the cardinal, he therefore decided to vent his anger out on this dear old lady. Now, as she stood on the scaffold side there, she would not place her neck on that large block of oak, declaring loudly that it was for traitors, and I am not such. So, she lifted up her dress, ladies and gentlemen, and she took flight. She ran off. Off she went around our village green. Now, this startled the executioner a bit, who proceeded to chase her with his axe. You can imagine him now running round our lovely village green, him hacking her wildly as they ran. He managed to strike her, folks, 28 times before he brought her down to the ground. She was 68 years of age. Queen Catherine Howard, fifth wife to King Henry VIII, charged with associations with other men, both before and during the marriage to King Henry, but it was to be an affair with a gentleman of the court by the name of Thomas Culpeper, which was to prove her downfall. Now, she stood on the scaffold side there. She turned to the executioner and said, "I die the Queen of all England, but I'd rather have died the wife of Culpeper." Now, Thomas Culpeper was standing in the audience that day going... He was eventually taken from here as a prisoner to Tyburn, where Marble Arches to this day, it's near Oxford Street, folks, and he was hung, drawn, quartered. It was Jane, the Viscountess of Botford, her lady-in-waiting, executed immediately afterwards on the very same block of bloody oak. Her crime, well knowing of the Queen's adulterous affairs, but failing to pass them on to King Henry. 12 years would pass before that scaffold side be used once more. This time, the tragic and innocent victim was a 16-year-old girl, known as Lady Jane Grey. Now, this poor young girl was but a pawn in a power struggle by ambitious relatives. On the death of her cousin King Edward VI, she was proclaimed Queen of all England and ruled here at the Tower of London for 9 days. Now, that was until the rightful heir, Mary Tudor, Bloody Mary, would gain the throne back by force of arms. Now, Lady Jane Grey and her young husband, Lord Guildford Dudley, after their trials at London's Guildhall, were brought back to the Tower of London under sentence of death. It is said that Lady Jane Grey was kept at number 5, Tower Green. It is the traditional home of the gentleman jailer. In fact, folks, it's just to the right of the Queen's house there, as you look at it. Now, from a first-floor window, she watched her young husband, Lord Guildford, being literally dragged out of his place of imprisonment from the Beauchamp Tower, kicking and screaming, to the site of his execution on Tower Hill. A short while later, she watched his headless, bloody body come back in a handcart for burial there at the chapel. As if that wasn't anguish enough for that young girl, she watched the carpenter's folks put in the scaffold site together, just there, for her very own execution. It was a tragic, tragic day in English history. Now, Lady Jane Grey, and Queen Anne Boleyn, Queen Catherine Howard, and many, many more of our famous characters, ladies and gentlemen, are buried inside our beautiful royal chapel. Now, as you're going through the entranceway, mind the step, okay? As you're going through the entranceway, if you walk down the aisle, at the front you'll find the altar. That, ladies and gentlemen, is where they are all laid to rest. Now, I mentioned earlier about James Scott, didn't I? The Duke of Monmouth, when he was down at the Bell Tower, and how his head was stitched back onto his body. Some of you, just some of you, may be perhaps a little bit curious as to why we would do such a terrible thing. Well, in those days it was tradition to have a portrait painted of yourself. And on the very day of his execution, we had forgotten to do it. A yeoman warder was told to run to London Bridge. Run there as fast as you can. Go and bring back that head. Come back with the right one, will you? The Surgeon General meticulously stitched it back together again. They laid him on a couch. They put a ruff around his neck. And the court painter painted him. Pretty quickly, in fact. Now, you can see that portrait still. You can find it on the internet or even floating around the galleries of England. But, folks, if you ever get a chance to see James in that picture, he has a rather vacant look on his face. Some would say he was slightly detached. I did say it was not going to get any better, didn't I? Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is all I have time to tell you about the fascinating stories of the Tower of London. I hope you enjoyed my tour this afternoon. You continue to enjoy the rest of your day in this beautiful winter sunshine. Now, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask any of my young ward colleagues around here. They'll be more than happy to help you. But before I let you escape, folks, I'm going to give you some of the answers, because we get asked the same questions over and over and over again. Ladies and gentlemen, ER, contrary to what any of these young warders will say walking around here, does not stand for extremely romantic. It is Elizabeth Regina Seconda. Elizabeth, our Queen II, is a royal insignia, and it will change sadly when we have a change of monarchy. Now, we also get asked how we become yeoman warders here at the Tower of London. 3 things we must do to be a yeoman warder here at the Tower. First off, we have to have served in the military a minimum of 22 years. That's a full-service career, either in the Army, the RAF or the Royal Marines. We have to be the rank of a warrant officer and above before we retire, and have one of these on here which has got a long service and good conduct medal, which in my case is 15 years of undetected crime. Keep it that way. We also get asked many times, where does the term beefeater come from? Why are you all called beefeaters? Well, I'm going to give you, good folks, the definitive answer, right here on our very own village green. Are you ready for it? Yeah? Good. I've no idea. No idea whatsoever. We just don't know, folks. None of us know where the term beefeater comes from. It is a slang term, a nickname given to us many hundreds of years ago, and sadly, no one ever bothered to write it down. And if we was told why we was called beefeaters in those days, we was probably so drunk we wouldn't ever remember, okay? Now, we can surmise many years ago we were the bodyguards to the kings and queens of England, especially during the reign of King Henry VII, and we are actually sworn in as bodyguards to the Queen even to this day in St James's Palace. But in those days, okay, we looked after the kings and queens wherever they went, and we was probably paid in kind, a ration of beef, okay? May come from that. Now, it may also be a French term. We're not quite sure where this comes from, for buffeteer or beefeater. And apparently in French it means a pretty soldier. Good night. Actually, that was quite a derogatory term, because a pretty soldier in French was a soldier perhaps would not or could not fight on the battlefields. Of course, we were bodyguards of the kings and queens many, many years ago, and in 1826, when the Duke of Wellington was here, he was the famous victor of the Battle of Waterloo. He came to the Tower of London, he was here for many years, he made some major changes, and one of the changes he made, folks, he got rid of all the old yeoman warders that had been passed down from generation to generation. He got rid of all them, he didn't want them, they was a bit off, okay, and all he said is he wanted his meritorious, gallant men around him, the people that have fought with him on the battlefields of France. And that is why we're here to this day. Right, I've kept you long enough. Just to remind you, you can go inside our beautiful chapel, mind a step as you're going in, or alternatively, you can make your way under the clock there and go into the Jewel House, the House of Bling. Now, if you enjoyed my tour today, my name is Chris. If you didn't like me very much, you can call me Kevin. Have a lovely day here at the Tower. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, thank you. Thank you very much indeed.
Oh, you didn't bring it.